fragility of our civilization. What do we do now? How do you fulfill your greatest potential and thrive in this new, fast-changing reality? Collectively, we know we have to make a transition to a regenerative system that is in harmony with the Earth. Local communities must become more resilient and self-reliant. Building Our Regenerative Future is a month-long intensive course that teaches the new skills and tools we all need to know now to make this shift. We examine the crucial macro trends in areas such as food, health, community, economics, culture, and consciousness. Building Our Regenerative Future presents a revolutionary new source code for the future of civilization and your own future. Hey everybody, welcome to our intro. I'm here with Rory Spowers, and Bruce Parry will be joining us in a minute. We're very excited about this course, which launches on June 29th. It's definitely a new venture for us, an experiment. We're doing 8 sessions over the course of a month, along with some optional extra workshops, optional reading material, possibility to gain a kind of certificate. That includes a written exam. And yeah, kind of the title of the course sort of sums it up: Building Our Regenerative Future. We're really looking at a time of great uncertainty. A lot of people don't really know what's ahead. There's a lot of confusion. And we kind of feel that we can sort through that and sort of say what the goals are. What would be the best possible goals for us individually? How do we thrive in these changing, turbulent times? What are the tools that we need to flourish? And then also, how do we contribute to a larger process of social change and evolution? And yeah, Rory, anything you want to add to the basic gist of it?
No, I think that's great, but I suppose what sort of holds all of these core topics together within this regenerative umbrella is that they, by their very nature, bring us back in step with biological systems. So that the force that is driving us in ever deeper towards off the precipice is a linear and extractive system, which is fundamentally at odds with the way nature works. So the way we can step back inside the system is by creating systems that are by their very nature regenerative and cyclical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're looking at a number of different areas that we're featuring. We're going to talk about food. We're seeing that food is a major area: health, culture, economy, consciousness, and we're going to start with an introduction. Where are we now? Where do we go from here? And a conclusion, which is going to be more on how do we build kind of a unified movement around these ideas. We're going to jump into these after Bruce talks in more depth. But essentially, the 3 main goals of the course. We want people to gain knowledge, for there to be kind of a coherent, unified field effect where people really have a shared idea of what's possible now, what types of changes have to be made ecologically and socially and personally, how they make those changes, from knowledge into action. What are some of the practical tools? Like, let's say you want to become more self-sufficient or resilient. Maybe you want to, begin to move into community living, cooperative ways of being. We're going to try to help guide people through some of that. And then, so it's knowledge, action, and connection. And connection is really, creating this field of collaboration where we're aware that there are more people who share these goals of, making the shift towards regenerative society. And that's kind of how we're seeing it. It's really meant to be kind of proactive. And what we're offering in the course includes obviously the course itself. The sessions will be live. We're going to have special guest hosts, faculty, and all the sessions will be archived. So if you miss the session, you'll be able to watch it any time. We'll have additional resources, reading, watching lists, guidelines for future study, potentially some exercises. As I mentioned, a certification, some optional workshops in areas that don't really we know are very, people we're very passionate about, but don't really fit into the main categories. Kind of a community and engaged hub or network for the future. Rory, anything you want to throw in there? Anything that stands out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just, Bruce has obviously got some amazing insights from all of his time spent with Indigenous people around the world, around what we can learn from them in terms of community. And I think there's two aspects to this. There's the sort of online digital community, which I think is an important aspect, but it's also then the analog real-time community. And I guess whatever we may make of what's going on in the world right now, one thing we do know is that community and the solidarity and resilience and strength within a community is going to be really critical, dealing with whatever it is that's coming down the pipe from any different kind of direction. So I think how we make this sort of step change from these quite well-known individual lifestyle actions into these more collective community level engagements, and that's really a way we're proposing that deep systemic change can actually happen from the grassroots, from the ground up, creating these small little nodal cells, if you like, that become the catalysts within their communities.
Great. So let's bring Bruce on. And Bruce, I thought the first question maybe for you to explore would be, like what do you think of this whole concept of regenerative society, kind of moving? This is a model for the future of civilization. Do you think it's feasible? Do you think it's out of the question? And then how are you seeing that people could move in this direction?
Hey, a little one to start with, eh? Well, firstly, I just want to say how pleased I am that you're putting this thing together. I've been an avid follower of a lot of your posts recently, Daniel. I find that your, especially on Facebook, fearless explorations of these wide-ranging subjects have been a great solace for many of us. And same for you, Rory. It's like I've learned so much from you over the years. It's really nice to see you come together. And I really feel that there, depending on how this all unfolds, but there's a real possibility for there to be some real deep learning and interesting new findings that could come out from this. So it's, I'm very grateful for you inviting me in to be part of the the introduction. So to answer your question, is it possible? Yeah, it absolutely is. Is it probable, or what's the likelihood? Well, that's in the balance, isn't it? And it's a really curious time for us all. The whole world for the first time ever has gone into some sort of hibernation, and I'm still really curious what's going to happen when we come out. I still don't know what the state of play is going to be. Most of my friends have had actually quite a positive time recently, but I don't know what it would have been like to have been cooped up in a tiny little cubby hole in a city for all this period of time, whether that's going to accentuated trauma or whether it's going to actually have invited people to enter into a new way of thinking. I think the jury's out on that. But moments like this are going to come again, and there is such a thirst for a change, but there's also a thirst for business as usual, and it's so scary seeing that we're just going back, bailing out all these, we're bailing out the airlines and everything, and it's like the status quo is still pretty strong, and so all of our thoughts and dreams and sort of sideline wishes still feel quite like they're peripheral actually at the moment. And so for all of the people that are out there that wanting something different, I don't think there's real answers for them yet. And so that's why I think what you're offering is really vital. But the hardest thing is to get the messages out. So often we're in our own echo chambers and we're just speaking to the converted, and it's like, how do we get this in the mainstream? That's the hardest thing, because the narratives that we're all dealing with that are being pumped out are the same old narratives. And that's where I think the battleground is. I was watching Steve Bannon this morning on his War Room Pandemic, talking about this the Seattle alternate zone, and just highlighting all the negativity that's going on there, and how this sort of autonomous society is like really just at each other's throats, and it's all negative. And of course, that's the normal mainstream message, that anarchy or any form of decentralization is going to cause us to just turn on each other And then you can turn to another channel and they'll say quite the opposite. And that's where the fight is. It's in these narratives.
Yeah, it's even very strange. I mean, in Seattle, apparently the police just kind of abandoned their precinct there, almost as if they were inviting this thing to happen as a kind of optic for the right wing. Bruce, I'm curious. I mean, you and I both share like a huge interest in indigenous cultures, and believe that they have kind of seeds of knowledge for us. I mean, on the other hand, here we are in this huge globalized, industrialized world with 8 billion people on the planet. You know, what can we kind of take or borrow or share from the indigenous ways that could be helpful for people as we go through this more and more uncertain kind of time that we're entering?
Well, I mean, endless wisdom and knowledge that we can learn from our indigenous cousins who are still living today, and also our own ancestors from the past. And so much of that is already in the world, there's like notions of connecting to nature, notions of bringing up children in community, notions of how to go through healing practices, notions of plant medicines, all of these sorts of things. They're gaining more traction, and that's so beautiful and it's so necessary. And you see that more and more around the world. But the thing that I've been really interested in recently, and Rory will know this because obviously we made the film together, To Why, is this idea of truly decentralized, non-competitive, egalitarian societies. That was actually our default mode for like 90% of our time on the planet, that we lived in a relative harmony with each other before hierarchy and aggression and competition sort of took hold and took off. And I find that is an area that I'm super interested in, because again, it's just another one of these areas that challenges the narrative of today. The narrative for today is that we've always been aggressive, we've always been competitive, we've always been warlike, it's always been patriarchal. It's like, this is just the same old, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're an aggressive species that's just out there to have its way. And it's just not my experience,
But Bruce, even, and I'm just curious, because it's become a very, like Daniel Schmachtenberger has become very popular talking about anti-rivalrous systems and how rivalry and competition is somehow totally bad. But isn't it kind of basic? I mean, even the hunter-gatherer societies, don't the men compete over who can bring in the biggest wild boar or something? I mean, isn't there a little of that,
Well, it's so fascinating you say that, because of course that is the narrative, and it's even what we're taught, have been taught for a long time, even in anthropology and what have you. It's just, there's so many studies that would suggest that's the case, but there's a growing understanding that that's actually not the case, that there were very, very, very powerful and strong and well-used tools within a lot of these societies that I've had the privilege of spending time with, that were the opposite of that, that actually the hunter, if he started showing off that he was the better hunter, the other guys would refuse to go hunting with him. That they would every step do everything they could to minimize power centralizing, to minimize people showing off or hoarding, because they knew universally, each and every one of them in their own bones, in their own body, that if power got out of hand, it would cause problems for the society. Well, we're learning that for ourselves now, but they just had a narrative that kept it ticking over, but not coming from a centralized body that held them to account, but coming from every individual be fully empowered and autonomous to be able to hold each other to account in this unified field of understanding that it just isn't good for us. And I find that so compelling. And I know it's a long, long way from where we're at, but it's just, for me, it's like knowing what's possible allows us to take those incremental steps towards that direction. And that direction for us here is decentralization. And I think we'd all agree with that.
So you think that things like mutual aid networks, as one example, might become more significant as we enter this crisis period?
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think there's so many things out there, and and the rise of the internet makes a lot of this possible now. The rise, even some of the views coming out of Silicon Valley have at its heart decentralization. They've forgotten about the accumulation of wealth aspect of it. But as far as decentralization, there's all sorts of stuff that's rising now, and people are seeing the benefits of it. So I think that it's gaining traction, but it is, like I say, it's a war of narratives at the moment, and I just want to add that one, because I feel that it offers us so much of an insight that sort of does something, I think, to us inside. It's like, it's relaxing. Yeah, that's what I feel in my heart is the better way to be. And actually, wow, that's how it was for the majority of our time on the planet. I think that's a powerful message to put back in the world.
Sorry, I'm just getting a message in there. But Bruce, I was just wanting to go back to what you were saying there. But that whole, I assume that those sort of self-regulating attributes of the tribal network, no doubt, evolved over a long period. But of course, what we've got now, and if we look at how natural systems at every scale work, whether it's the neural network or mycelial networks underground or coral reefs, all of these are these nodal distributed network systems. And the hierarchical sort of linear systems that are human engineered and we've imposed on top of that are just never going to be in step with it. It's just logically impossible. So I do think part of the process, before we can do anything differently, we've got to think differently, and we've got to sort of look upstream to all of these things, so that we're always patching up the symptoms downstream rather than going upstream and looking at trying to prevent those things even arising in the first place. And that's why I think this trying to catalyze these things within communities at the grassroots level. The way that immunity and resilience develops in an ecosystem is through nature's relentless desire to complexify and diversify, and that's what gives it those attributes. And what we have is a homogenizing, centralized, top-down, techno-driven culture now that is essentially just sort of commodifying everything it can, right down now to our data and even the human body, because it's run out of other things to turn into commodities. So I think I always go back to the Buckminster Fuller quote, yes, that you can't create change by fighting existing reality. You have to make new models to make the existing model obsolete. And I would say that this is where it all lies, is us starting to show these new models at a community level. And that's how people will get drawn in and then maximize their resilience and immunity to what's coming down the pipe.
No, I couldn't agree more, Rory. I mean, in fact, it's exactly the place that I got to in the last few years, having spent many years as a broadcaster and filmmaker, and realizing that actually it's all very well running around talking about it, having a high carbon footprint, pretend it or doing the best I could, but actually ultimately still being part of the issue. And I was like, the best thing I can do now is step back and actually be the change and try and do exactly that. It's like show that not only is it the best thing for our kids going forward, for the ecology, for the environment, for every aspect of how we're going to try and get through, but also that it can be extraordinarily positive and beautiful and fun, and there's a whole bunch of things that you have to make an exchange of some of the things that we found fun before, all the consumption, all the frills, all the excitement, all the stuff. Some of that's going to lose some of its luster. You're going to let go of some of that, but in its place is something else going to arise that's going to be just as beneficial and fun and joyful. But there is a transition period, and it is difficult. It is hard slowing down when we're so addicted to stimulation, when we're so addicted to these comforts and all of these excitements of our life, and taking a slightly different path is a journey. But I think we just, again, have to believe that in the long run is something in there that is just as good, that's just as beneficial. And I think that it helps so much when people come together for that. It's very hard to make these journeys on our own, but when we can come together, then it's a much, much more manageable and enjoyable thing. And I think so many people found that when they went to the streets with XR, here's a decentralized way of doing things, and people coming together for a festival, but actually with this, with meaning at its heart, you get a taste of it there. And it's like lots and lots of people moving to intentional communities now and stepping away. And I think in its own right, that is a form of revolution. It is a revolutionary act to grow your own food and to really pay a huge amount of attention to how much you're buying into, energizing and giving your power away to these corporate mites and corporate entities that are just running the show. It's like stepping back and doing things in localized ways is a radical form of revolutionary action in its own right, I believe. And it also, I mean, we don't have time to go onto this now, but if we have a chat later during the course, I can elucidate more about that first revolution, Rory, you've heard me talk about it before, you know, when we took down the alpha male, when the women came together and said no to the alpha male and invited the other guys to come in to live in egalitarian, harmonious societies. There are lessons in that about how we can, what we can learn from those early people, that first ever revolution, about how to deal with power, how to tackle power rather than challenging it head on and trying to fight it, because we will always lose if we try and challenge that power base in the same way that it is. It's too powerful. We have to find other ways. And one of them is stepping to one side and creating these communities. But there are other tools as well that we can use for really challenging the power. And I think that's would be an interesting thing to explore.
So Bruce, I'm really happy that you're here with us. I think what we're going to do is we're going to run through the different sections of the course for about 10, 15 minutes. And then if you're amenable, we'll bring you back on. We'll have a little bit more of a discussion. You've opened up a lot of questions that I would love to, you know, get into. I mean, that's the problem. I think that, you know, Rory and I are all, you know, very personally fascinated with this exploration. And yeah, we just want to share that fascination, you know. So that's great. I also want to mention that, you know, in honor of Bruce Parry, we're having a 20% discount offer if people want to jump on the course. They just have to use the code Bruce, which is not for Bruce Springsteen, but for Bruce Parry at the checkout at the Crowdcast site, or they just go to Regenerative regeneratefuture.net, and from there they can register for the course with that code. So yeah, so let's jump into the 6 areas that we're focusing on, well, actually 8 areas, because we have a beginning and an end. And the first area, Rory and I will discuss together. It's just kind of opening. Where do we go from here? How do we understand this global crisis we're in? You know, this cascading of impacts of the COVID-19 on, you know, health, but also on economies and social life. You know, obviously we're seeing these massive changes happening in the US right now, these massive protests, kind of proto-revolutionary protest movement happening. Yeah, does this open up an opportunity for kind of a profound transition or transformation, you know? Roy, do you want to maybe go through some of these topics?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, Daniel was the one that introduced me first to this notion of the planetary initiation, or the crisis. And I think it's so pertinent right now. It really was speaking to me loud and clear over the recent months that, having wanted some kind of sort of transition phase for sort of so long, those of us who've been sort of working in this area, suddenly we were presented with this extraordinary hiatus time. So it's an incredibly potent time right now for us to actually sort of, you know, affect some of these changes. And I think, you know, moving on from that into the, you know, how we sort of thrive within that, I think what we just touched on earlier about, you know, turning this into an adventure. It's not about something sort of irksome and tiresome and some laborious thing to enter into. It should be something that we, you know, that should be enjoyable and fun, and about bringing people together, and that just helps to build these strong connections in communities that is going to be so crucial. Shall I just go through those top 4, Daniel?
Yeah, we'll go for it.
And then the you know, sustainability, you know, this term that's been very co-opted, and ultimately it's the sort of gradualist incremental tweaks to things that are already broken. It's, you know, about making business a little bit less bad than it was before, and it's not really looking upstream to where the problems are arising. So that's, I think, a very important distinction to make, that these regenerative models, there's this concept of backcasting, which we can unpack a bit, you know, in the course, but I think it really starts with challenging some of these basic assumptions, and recognizing just how much power and control we've lost over our central basic human needs, and we've abdicated that control to these centralized institutions and corporations. And then again, this theory of change, and it's a tricky one, because of course there are lots of people doing incredible work at the interface on a sort of policy level, within businesses, the circular economy, all of those sorts of areas, and also the civil dissent move, you know, the Extinction Rebellions. All of these things I think need to happen, but for a lot of us, these things are maybe just too abstract from our lives, and I think we really want to look at how we can all come together to start to implement some of these new models in a humble, you know, co-creative way within our communities, whether it's a community-supported agriculture initiative, a micro-energy grid, a wind power cooperative, all of these different models, because then we're actually showing people that it can be done. Daniel, do you want to do those 4 below then?
Yeah, I mean, we want to explore. It's it'll be a sub theme throughout the course. Will be the psychedelic renaissance. Both of us have been involved with that. My first book, Breaking Open the Head, was kind of helped kind of shift cultural perceptions around psychedelic shamanism. Rory has been the director of the Tyringham Initiative, which has been doing psychedelic research. And we want to propose in a way the psychedelic renaissance has been maybe in a way tamed or domesticated. It's mostly focused on personal healing and creativity for software engineers. But we feel that the deeper value of the psychedelic experience has to do with really gaining like a new perception, like a new social understanding that can be applied in different ways. And so we're going to touch on that throughout the course. What we're calling the regenerative model, which includes, as Rory mentioned, cyclical economics, bioremediation, community-based values, relocalization, bioregionalism, how these might become the new standards for the future, kind of replacing, nationalism and corporatism and so on. What we also really want to focus on in the course is what people can do practically at this point to improve their lives. So when we talk about moving competition to collaboration, we'll talk about local economies, new types of careers that are opening up in the regenerative sector, new ways that people can get involved in building this better future. Even if it requires a little bit of temporary sacrifice, right? Because maybe you're not going to make as much money in the short term as you would in advertising if you're like a psychedelic psychotherapist, or if you're doing a farming community, but actually it might be much more sustainable for the long term. And one of our visions is that part of the shift is going beyond the paradigm of the present time, which is based on materialism and separatism, separation, alienation, and what it means to develop a kind of new story for the people, a new mythology for humanity awakening, and how we can all play a part in developing that story and sharing that mythology. So let's move on to the next area.
Great. So we're starting with food. When I pulled together these 6 topics for the regeneration platform a year ago, the idea was to try and show a sort of systemic journey rather than a linear one, that each of these are sort of embedded within each other, and that food and water being our most basic essential human need, and that if we start really upstream with our basic autonomy and sovereignty over these immediate needs, this is also the area where we have the greatest power to affect change potentially. It's of course very difficult to be prescriptive in any shape or form, because people live in so many different situations. So obviously we want to have a really strong look at urban agriculture, which may seem like a really daunting prospect, but there are so many amazing possibilities out there. So relocalizing our food system, this move towards regenerative farming, which in the last 20 years has just shown how this is maybe the ultimate systemic solution, because not only can we get our food back under our control, but we can also sequester lots of carbon back into the soil through photosynthesis, which is what nature's been doing so successfully for many millions of years. And I think when we get as much control over our food system as possible, we obviously are building our our resilience and self-reliance for the future. Beyond meat and looking at a diet and veganism, a very complex and polarizing issue, and we will definitely want to unpack that a bit. There's no doubt that we should all be eating considerably less meat, but there are very complex arguments to look at there that, that livestock, beg your pardon, can play a very fundamental role within these regenerative farming systems. The 7 herbs, we want to then really also look at the role of nutrition and some of the things that we can all be doing very easily at home, within families, within communities, to optimize our immunity, the microbiome. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in the next section. And then this whole area around soil biology and soil carbon, which is really very recent. 20 years ago, when I wrote my book Rising Tides, people still felt that it took hundreds of years to make topsoil, but we now know that's not true. And regenerative farmers across the globe have done extraordinary things within 10 years, turning 1 or 2 inches of denuded topsoil into really 8-10 inches of thriving topsoil within 10 years. And again, livestock can play a fundamental role within that. But also the rewilding movement and just this need to be working with nature and its inherent need to diversify rather than the centralized industrial agribusiness, which is resorting to ever greater quantities of chemicals and pesticides to try and maintain a system that's fundamentally out of step with what nature is trying to do. Permaculture, really important term, I think much misunderstood, often only aligned with food systems, but it's about an integrated sort of whole systems lifestyle design philosophy where the built environment, your food system, your water, your rainwater harvesting, your energy, it's how you bring all of these things together to maximize your self-reliance and your resilience as a family, as a community. And these principles can be applied at any scale, even if you're living in an apartment or if you've got a tiny back garden or whether you're living in a very rural area. Seaweed farming is a macro issue in a way, but it does have this extraordinary possibility for mitigating climate change. Seaweeds grow something like 30 times faster than any land-based crops and have an extraordinary ability to sequester carbon very, very rapidly. They can also then rebuild biodiversity in the oceans, which can then supply vast populations with fish protein. Obviously, people who live on the coast are involved with the fishing industry. This could be much more pertinent, but there are some amazing models out there, like this 3D ocean farming model, which could be really, I think, again, another hugely interesting entrepreneurial area for us to look at. Urban agriculture, community composting initiatives, community orchards, all of these things. There are so many amazing initiatives within the urban landscape which are possible, from guerrilla gardening through to these big rooftop gardens like Loofah Farms in Montreal, which supplies a phenomenal amount of vegetables to the local community. And then local farms. I mean, many of us live in a place where we've got no access to decent sort of soil to grow things, but we might live close by somewhere where we can go and get involved. And community-supported agriculture, I really believe, is one of the great ways we have to start really sort of building resilience into our community and maximizing our resilience against what might be coming. And then I will just go into health before Daniel will look at the economic section. So I suppose going back to that sort of hierarchy of needs, food, water, and sort of personal health obviously being integral. Then I think within the community area, things like energy and communications and mobility and transport have become a sort of secondary thing. But I think in light of what's going on, we've got to really all take responsibility for our own health. Our understanding of the immune system now is much greater than it was until very recently. About our understanding of the microbiome, something like 80% of our immune system health comes from our gut flora, and there are all sorts of things that we can be doing there. And then there's this direct correlation between the health of the soil, the food that comes from the soil, and the health of your microbiome. And you could say that that sort of system extrapolates all the way up to the biosphere at large. There's even dopamine and serotonin in good, thriving organic topsoil. So the two prominent neurotransmitters in our brains they've only recently discovered are actually in topsoil as well. There are more microorganisms in 1 teaspoon of topsoil than all the humans that ever lived. So that gives you some understanding of the complexity that's there. Then there's very important sort of split between allopathic pharmaceutical interventionist medicine and biological medicine. The former obviously being miraculous these days when dealing with injuries, with acute injuries where you need intervention, but pretty inadequate when dealing with chronic systemic conditions where I think biological medicine has a much greater part to play. And I think that's something that we really want to look at. And then how that can also just inform us about building our immune system health. Vaccinations, again, another V word like veganism that's incredibly polarizing and very politicized. and complex, and something that we will try to unpack, because I think that's a bit of a minefield, but it's definitely high on our list of priorities at the moment when we see what's coming. The new sciences of epigenetics and neuroplasticity, again, in the last 10, 20 years, really redefining our notion of how much control we do have over these things that we've been sort of educated to believe that it's all down to this sort of genetic deterministic model that's now been shown to be woefully inadequate. Addiction, massive topic, obviously usually associated with substances, but now I think very, very pertinent in relation to technology and the digital space and our devices. And I think this is a really, really important area, and how we need to really sort of develop a level of discernment and discipline with that, because it's quite easy for us to expend a lot of the energy that could be going into some of these analog activities just disappearing into this digital space. And let's not forget the extraordinary sort of carbon impact. Every Google search, every movie you've streamed, and this is a hugely undiscussed issue, and it's massive. Detoxifying, particularly from heavy metals, I think is really, really critical now, especially with this sort of amplification of EMFs. There's an awful lot of studies to show that that heavy metals in our bodies are interacting with EMFs in a very negative fashion, and there are very simple things we can all do to detox from heavy metals. Certain things we can bring into our diets, like seaweeds and cracked cell chlorella and these microgreen algae and stuff, but also pesticide residues and the rest of it. And then Daniel talked a little bit about psychedelics, but I think obviously incredibly exciting what's emerging in that area in terms of dealing with the mental health crisis, addiction issues. It's an ability for us to really kind of reset. And I think one of the wider issues there that doesn't get discussed as much is actually this ability for it to provoke this biophiliac response, biophilia, Wilson coined, which is this innate sense that we belong to the biological world, and which so many of us seem to have lost. So I hope that helps to explore that a bit deeper. And then Daniel, if you want to go on to the economic section.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's different levels when it comes to the economy. I mean, on the one hand, as I wrote a book in 2017, How Soon Is Now, which was thinking about the ecological crisis and what types of systemic level changes we would have to make to really reckon with it. And on some level, we would have to deal with kind of the capitalist system, which is very debt-based and requires constant return on investment and constant growth and development. And we're kind of seeing that that's coming into conflict with the finite resources of the physical environment. So that's on a meta level. But on other levels, we can actually think about our own lives and our capacities to really participate from where we are now in this kind of regenerative economy of the future. So some of the topics that we're covering, there's this whole idea of the fourth industrial revolution, how that could be melded with regenerative design. Because whether you have a positive, neutral, or negative view of technologies, when we look at the extent of the changes, the geophysical changes that are happening to the planet, if we're actually going to address them in a way that allows, more than a handful, of communities to survive, we're going to have to look at exponentially scalable technologies in areas like energy and, forestry and so on. I mean, these include things like, biochar, which is a way of burning organic matter so that it creates a soil-rich tilth that can regenerate forests and cropland, or rainwater harvesting and so on. So and then there are going to be real legitimate opportunities for people to have careers in this regenerative economy. I mean, it's not in doubt that the attention is going to turn in this way. I mean, in the same way, like Black Lives Matter was kind of simmering for a number of years and then suddenly has exploded and erupted into this global force. There can really be no doubt that the ecological emergency, which has been kind of hovering on the periphery of mainstream awareness, within the next few years is going to become the main driver of society. We're not going to have a choice. I mean, Europe was 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer last winter than ever before. The changes that are happening are very fast. And they're going to create new opportunities, as they create chaos and tumult. And some of that is going to be reflected in new economic models, degrowth and so on. We're talking about the economics of happiness, how we move from a GDP model to a gross happiness index, how we really make people's thrivability disconnected from purely consumerist models and so on. Circular and donut economics. We'll talk about, now we're seeing major cities adopt this donut economics model that Kate Raworth developed, like Amsterdam. Hopefully we'll speak to her or a representative of that design philosophy. Radical localization, bioregionalism. There's different ways that you can use economic models to reinforce these. Tom Greco is somebody who's written about local exchange trading systems as one modality. How we can actually finance the distributed renewable energy revolution. I mean, we know that the costs for renewable energy sources have gone way down in relationship to fossil fuels. It's just a question of making that really mainstream. I do want to mention, I know this is a lot of information that we're sort of passing through very quickly. All of this is available on the PDF we have for the course, and that you can pick up by going to our website, regenerativefuture.net. and giving us your email, then we'll send you the whole PDF package. So we'll look at ethical investment, models for redistributing capital, divestment. We'll look at localization compared to globalization, how we could kind of globally relocalize. And we'll look at cryptocurrencies, their promise, and also, now we're seeing some of the realities of crypto. Bitcoin, for instance, many people would now say supports kind of a right-wing libertarian ideology, unfortunately. But in a sense, crypto gives us the sense that we can redesign our financial system in really profound ways. So, there could be tools in crypto for the future that would help us to bring about this decentralized, holistic economic model. Let's go on to the next area here. Community. Once again, we're looking at a model where, we've lived in this industrial civilization where people are alienated, separated in cities, sort of cling to their families, but community has been something that was really a main bulwark of humanity, through most of our history. Until recently, we've kind of lost it in the industrial world. And it's something that crisis is necessarily going to bring back. There's a beautiful book by Rebecca Solnit, A Paradise Built in Hell, where she looks at kind of communities that were hit by these terrible disasters, and how actually, strangely enough, people often remember them as the best times of their lives afterwards, because they were brought together around shared mission and shared purpose. And this also goes back to this idea of seeing this time as a great initiation and a great opportunity where we can actually activate what's deepest and most powerful within us. Let's go over to the topics for community. So we only have a few topics here, but there's decentralized local governance models, different examples that already exist. Porto Alegre in Brazil is one. There's different movements that are starting or have started. Podemos in Spain is one grassroots movement. Symbiosis.net is another interesting one, trying to reinstate local direct democracy. We're going to look at how you can start your own community. Or join one, find one that appeals to you, or start one from scratch. We'll look at this idea. Many people are now thinking about leaving cities or leaving countries. People are beginning to think about, leaving the United States if they have the wherewithal. Places like Nicaragua and Costa Rica, may provide opportunities for people to really experiment with new social designs, new back to the land kind of living systems. And we'll look at indigenous design models, how they provide templates and what we can take from them. Ritual being a key component, and ceremony being a key component in indigenous lives and in their approach to the world. And we'll look at leadership. There's going to be a new need for leadership, and we're hoping that the people who take this course will really be seeing themselves as kind of leaders of this emergent new culture, this regenerative paradigm, and we'll provide some tools and ideas for that. So let's go on to the next topic here. I know our time is ticking away here. Culture is another important area. How do we tell the new story? What is the new story of the people? What's the new mythology? How do we use all these incredible tools we have now of media, social media, YouTube, and so on? How do we spread the great ideas? And let's go to the topics for that. Yeah, how do we use the power of media? How do we harness it? How do we use our own network, our own outreach? How do we become the best, most useful storytellers for our people? How we can, if we are culture makers, how we embrace our role as storytellers and myth makers, how we understand that as a crucial role in this time. How to understand culture as an operating system, and how we can then think about the shift of culture as part of the relaunch of our whole social operating system, and how that contributes to building this new planetary culture, which is really our focus, models, myths, and principles of that shift. And yeah, different areas, storytelling for art, for music, for activism, how you can show up as a leader in this movement and maximize the power of your own voice. And as we mentioned earlier, for the next day, for those people who are watching this, 20% option to join the course. Use the code Bruce for Bruce Parry, not Bruce Springsteen, at the checkout at the regenerativefuture.net site. Let's go on to the next topic area here. Let's quickly move through this.
Yeah, so just finally, we look at, the penultimate episode is on consciousness. Dare I say it, that word spiritual, but it's really, I guess, questioning the biggest assumption of all about who and what we are, what we think we are in relation to each other and to the wider world. So we want to start by our understanding what consciousness is. Is it actually a bizarre emergent property of complex neuronal firing, like we've been led to believe, or is it something much more fundamental, something much more primary, which the mystics have always said, and which many scientists now seem to be converging on? This concept of the left-right brain hemispheres, which I really got to thank Bruce for leading me to the work of Ian McGilchrist, but I almost with each passing day, I noticed this more and more within myself. And I think this our sort of desperate need at the moment to make sense of what is going on is this very focused left brain aspect, whereas our comfort with the uncertainty of what's going on, which I think we need to cultivate in a way, is a very more right hemisphere thing, which is much more present. I think there's a lot we can learn from that model. Personal and planetary initiation. So again, how we can use this incredibly potent time with these new understandings to really sort of re-envision our sense of human identity and how that connects with those around us. We've touched a lot already on psychedelic shamanism, but nature mysticism, panpsychism, these other sort of more animistic belief systems that can reconnect us to the natural world. Neuroscience and the default mode network, which is this very fancy scientific term that's emerged largely out of the sort of psychedelic Renaissance, and it's a term that really applies to the sort of egoic structure of the brain and how the psychedelic experience and the meditative experience and the mystical experience represses that part of the brain and brings us much more back into the presence. Archetypal astrology, an area that I know Daniel is very keen on, but some of these systems have a lot to teach us, I think. And then ritual, pilgrimage, and intention. Just if we spend too much of our time absorbed by the notion that everything is going to hell, we've got very little hope of actually sort of realizing it. I think if we can all collectively really start to just build a picture of what this regenerative society might actually look like and what we want to aspire to, we have a much greater possibility of bringing it about. And I think there's a role for ritual within all our lives, and even pilgrimage to important sites and the rest of it as well. And I think actually the basic human activity of walking, I think, is probably one of the most underestimated antidotes to the mental health crisis. And then finally, in the concluding episode, we want to just look at how we can marry these more localized efforts within a more global unified movement. So how do we actually connect these analog activities with the digital domain in a way that we can maximize their dissemination and potential sort of replication? So coalescing and consolidating all of that. I think this whole area around how we organize ourselves, again, we can learn so much from the way that ecosystems organize themselves. This notion of autopoiesis, where as an ecosystem gets more complex and diverse, its ability to self-organize also increases. So it's all of these things which are, in a way, sort of antithetical to the top-down hierarchical homogenizing system that's being imposed upon us. And again, and embracing your purpose. I think finding a sense of meaning and purpose is so crucial right now. So many of us have had our lives so disrupted and so uprooted, it's very hard to see a way forward. And I think many of these initiatives and projects that we wanted to highlight can actually give meaning and purpose back to people and families and communities and bring them together. And Daniel, why don't you just wrap up on those last three there, maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and as we said, so first of all, but I'm really hoping this gives people a really good sense of the range of stuff we want to cover. And, these will be long sessions. They'll be live with experts and guest hosts, different segments. They'll also be archived if people only, can't make the live one, or if they can only watch some of it. It's going to start June 29th, and it'll run basically for the next month to late July. Twice a week. It'll be Monday and Thursday sessions. So yeah, we really hope you can join us. We have a price point for the course, which is, kind of €200, $220. We are totally, we're offering 20% discount. And also, we really, we want the course to be regenerative in its nature, which means that we understand that, there are people who can't really afford this type of price right now, and we're amenable to more discounted tickets or scholarships. If you're in need, if you can write to me and kind of let me know what's happening. So that's kind of where we're at. This is the course package. There's the cost, which I mentioned. You get 20% discount if you wish with the name Bruce at the checkout. Running 29th of June to 20th of July, and we're offering reduced price tickets and scholarships. There'll be building a community at the end of it, and just to go back to finish up the consciousness piece, Zach, if you can take us back to that other screen for a sec. Yep. Well, if not, I think basically.
If you want, there was just a section on the leadership, and team building, which I think we'd already touched on.
Oh yeah.
Grief and transformation. Interesting that in a way if we move through the sort of this sense of grief and despair, it can sort of take us into this much more sort of mobilized space, and it's almost like this sort of 5 stages of grief normally associated with personal grief. But I think a lot of us are now stuck in anger and denial and despair, and we somehow need to punch through that into this level of acceptance before we can then really sort of mass mobilize.
Exactly. So I think we're keeping Bruce still in the wings. So I think this is should we stop there? Or Bruce, do you want to come in for another minute and give us maybe just a few minutes feedback on the course?
Which area exactly? My God, that's quite a lot you've rattled through there.
Yeah, I mean, this was our idea, was to really create a kind of systemic overview, and then we can drill down in the future. But the feeling is really that there's so many people who are really going to benefit from having this sort of comprehensive framing and understanding, with practical tools for what they can do with this understanding. And then maybe we'll do another course just on food or just on health or just on community and take it much deeper,
Beautiful. Well, what can I add? I mean, it looks like you've pretty much gone everywhere, and someone's phone. Yeah, I nothing to say really, boys. It looks really good. I'm interested to see who you get along as contributors. Hopefully a diverse group of people. I'm sure there'll be all sorts of voices, and it'd be great as well if there's debate in it. It's not, rather than it just being a talk course, it'd be so good if there can be some real discussion going deep, so with some differences of opinion and views, so that you can really go there and flesh it out. Because of course a lot of it,
Bruce is going to have to, because I think that Rory and I even disagree on a bunch of things, so that's definitely going to come up.
Yeah, fair one. Yeah, because we can.
In terms of our contributors, just to, I'm not going to go full roster, but we have Sheena Rothor, who's amazing. Skeena, amazing co-director at Extinction Rebellion. Darren Springer, extraordinary student of kind of the African roots of psychedelic shamanism. We're working with Jasmine Helmsley, expert on Ayurveda and food. George Lamb, well-known TV host in the UK, who I'm sure you're friends with too, Bruce, who's doing an incredible program now called Grow with kids, trying to give them a more sustainable, rounded education. And a number of other teachers are on the website at regenerativefuture.net.
Great. Yeah, well, it's the learning is one thing, and of course the embodying and the bringing into practice is another. And Rory, you said earlier about the sort of like these two realms of the digital and the analog, and like it's all very well having this online discussion, online community, but it's actually bringing it into community here. But I think there's a sort of third space there as well, in the what I'm experiencing is like it's all very well having these new ways of being, these intentional communities, these new gatherings, but like how are they also physically on the ground interacting with the wider community of that which isn't necessarily wanting to change particularly at the same pace, or perhaps a little bit put out or put off by newfangled ways and all the rest of it. So I know in a sense that is what the course is all about. But it feels to me like the sort of the enacting and the learning of how for these new ways of being to be porous and to be transparent and to be open and to be inclusive, so that we don't have a them and us.
I think it's absolutely critical. And if you look at all of the sort of utopian alternative community experiments through history, generally the reason why most of them have failed is because they have isolated themselves from the wider world.
And wild country to get a taste of that.
Well, yeah. and then the successful ones, like some of these permaculture communities in Australia, etc., have actually recognised how important it is to have trade with the wider world and all sorts of things. So people come in to learn skills, or they sell some of their products, and yeah, this is how nature works. It's all about reciprocal flows and exchanges and relationships. So as soon as we remove ourselves from those wider relationships, we're again stepping outside the system and stepping outside the way biological systems work. So I think it's really important. No one knows the answers. It's a kind of co-creative journey, this, for all of us, isn't it? And we're all just trying to kind of help each other in the right direction, I guess.
Totally. And it just needs to be as inclusive as possible. There's so much separation. There's so much divide and conquer that's gone on for so long. There's so many slogan throwings and a lot of hatred and anger that's out there at the moment, that whatever it is that needs to come up has to encapsulate something that basically no one can argue with. In a way, it's what I'm trying to work out as well, just writing the manifesto for this community. It's like, what's the top line that no one can debate, that we can just all get behind? It's like a future for our children in balance with an environment that to support them. And it's something as simple as that no one can argue with, and then everything else can trickle down beneath that. It's like radically getting behind that. It's like nothing is sacrosanct. Everything needs to be seen through the prism of being held accountable to this thing that we all buy into. And that as a way forward for coming out of your course is like, what is this new narrative that you mentioned? How can it be that we all get behind it? No one, wherever you are on the political spectrum, any of the spectrums that are out there, we can all agree that that is the right thing to buy into.
That's wonderful. Well, listen, I think we should stop it there for tonight. And Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bruce.
We'll see you in one of the live sessions, hopefully in a few weeks. And I really appreciate your wisdom, and it was great to share with all of you.
Yeah, lots of love, guys. Good luck putting it all together. I look forward to joining you again, and I'll tap into one or two of the lectures if I'm allowed.
Of course.
Cool. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you everybody who's watching. Thank you so much.
The coronavirus pandemic has shown us the fragility of our civilization. What do we do now? How do you fulfill your greatest potential and thrive in this new, fast-changing reality? Collectively, we know we have to make a transition to a regenerative system that is in harmony with the Earth. Local communities must become more resilient and self-reliant. Building Our Regenerative Future is a month-long intensive course that teaches the new skills and tools we all need to know now to make this shift. We examine the crucial macro trends in areas such as food, health, community, economics, culture, and consciousness. Building Our Regenerative Future presents a revolutionary new source code for the future of civilization and your own future.